Well, thank you everybody for being here today and talking about the Freedom of Expression series. So President Schill, what inspired you to ask Deans Burke and Molletta to create a Freedom of Expression series?
So we had been thinking about this over the summer of last year as freedom of expression has become a much hotter issue on campus. And what we were seeing during that period was that the First Amendment and values of freedom of expression were being used by both the right and the left in ways that I felt were harmful to universities. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was to have a discussion on campus. We wanted to handle and talk about freedom of expression in a way that sort of met the ideals of a university, which is informed debate. So that was the reason why we went ahead and did it. And I've been just delighted with the events. I've attended many of them, and they've just been really wonderful.
What did you take away from the Freedom of Expression events? What surprised you and what encouraged you?
You know, what I like about the series is that it went beyond speakers. We had workshops, art exhibits, debates, roundtables. And this way we engage the idea of freedom of expression from different perspectives: athletics, the arts, the libraries, the schools and colleges.
So I participated in a panel with students and professors, and in this panel it was really surprising to talk about freedom of speech and some of our fears that we have. It's not something we talk about really, and just seeing like the other students have the same fear of whatever you post on social media, is it ever gonna get back to you? Or if you have like controversial political views, you sort of are scared of what to post or what to say to people. And it was sort of refreshing thinking, okay, I'm not the only one that has to mentally go through a filter every time like I type a text message, or every time I speak to someone I don't really know, or every time I want to post something on social media. I'm very self-conscious about that, especially data online. And seeing that other students had the same fears, and teachers as well. So
I was surprised to hear some of the stories in our discussion about how fear to speak up and consequently self-censor, not only in public spaces but also in private spaces such as in family gatherings, or for example, a story I remember from one of the participants was that she used to carpool with friends to work, and suddenly she found that her friends held opinions, political opinions, and supported Donald Trump, which she didn't, and then she couldn't speak up against them, so she had to stop carpooling to work.
See, and that is just so troubling, right? Because not only on the personal side that you can't do it with family and friends, but the whole purpose of a university is knowledge and becoming more aware of other people's arguments. And so if people can't talk about it, something as elemental and important as the policies of the President of the United States, how do we ever mend the divide in our country, or all the divides in our country? Because really, it's only through understanding that we can come to some resolution. This series was one way to encourage people to talk to each other and not to just take oppositional standpoints of yelling at each other or interrupting each other or anything like that.
I think what's interesting too is that sometimes people feel that not listening to other people's opinions makes them disappear. Giving everybody an equal platform to speak up, it's a good way to generate debate. It's a good way to acknowledge that there are people that have different points of view. What I learned too is just like asking the question of, what are you afraid to talk about? What are your sincere opinions that you're holding back because of current events? Having that sincere place of you being like, it's okay for you to say whatever you want to say, I just want to listen. It makes it so people are much more open and honest, and I think that way, if you want to change someone's point of view, it's a lot easier doing it with someone that's listening rather than someone that you don't let them speak, or you don't even hear out what they have to say.
I mean, I might be biased because I'm a history major, but I think that some of this is that we need to acknowledge past histories of people feeling unheard, of systematic oppression, of challenges that I think end up coming into the debate with a student who may not actually be representative of that, but they end up being kind of the representative in that discussion. So if you have a college Democrat and a college Republican, you may end up getting a deep history in that discussion when it's not actually what the other student is trying to say or representative of that. So I think sometimes it's also just acknowledging that this country has a deep history that is problematic, and if we can acknowledge that, then potentially that doesn't get as integrated into the discussion that's happening between two students and not between two histories and two legacies of what those students are representing in that individual moment where they're talking. But I think that shuts down the conversation sometimes when I have to represent Asian Americans or when I have to represent Hawaii people in the discussion, as opposed to just being able to represent what my sliver of a viewpoint is based on my background as those things.
I'm just wondering if anybody learned a new way of looking at themselves and realizing how they approach things sometimes after going to these events.
I think I did. It wasn't just these events, it was the whole sort of outcome of the year. And that was that you can create a situation where everybody feels that they can speak, but sometimes you have to take specific actions to empower them to speak. For example, I had always thought that everyone on campus was free to talk about what concerned them, and that there were a multiplicity of views, and everybody was getting their views out well. And then when it came time for the students who went under the banner of the collective to come in and talk, they felt they were totally voiceless. And I hadn't ever understood that to be the case. And so it helped me understand that for a group of our students, they feel that there is not a really good way for them to get their views across. And I think, again, that points to the need for us as a university to try to be even more inclusive and to try to take steps to provide ways for people to talk and get points of view across. Things like the series and things that we may be thinking about for next year.
For me, I learned that I wasn't looking at things in other people's perspectives. And from listening to other people's stories, I realized that I needed to step outside sometimes and put myself in their position. Besides that, going to the School of Journalism and realizing that so many people only talk about one side and we don't talk about two sides. And realizing that maybe that's my fault in a way because I'm not bringing it up, but I really could, even if I am on one side.
And it's interesting because a foundation of journalism is to be able to present both sides of the debate, especially for journalism students to understand the responsibility they have to find sources that express different point of views and allow the citizens or the reader or the listener to make their own mind. So probably is something that we need to reinforce in the school.
One thing you said that I thought was really interesting and I learned from the discussion was, taking yourself out of your own situation and trying to hear from other people's positions. And, he talked about there's this principle in freedom of speech that you can't stop speech unless there's within certain exceptions. And one of the exceptions is whether it's a true harm. And typically we think of that as violence, as that the government can say you can't speak if it's going to lead to violence or threats of violence. And what he tried to say was sometimes racist thought or racist expressions actually do psychological harm to the individuals. And that had been something, and that could be characterized as a true threat to that person's personality and being. And I thought that was a really interesting argument. It made me think a lot. It made me talk to other people a lot, and it came out of these sessions.
So what is the university's role and responsibility in creating an environment where students and members of the community, the campus community, can freely express themselves?
I think it's twofold. I think the university needs to create the space for these discussions to happen, sort of like what the Freedom of Expression series did. But also this needs to be fostered in the classroom and across departments. And then the second part of that is we need to help students to have the tools to have these discussions. So whether that's seeing social media as a tool for having a voice, but also understanding how to use that tool properly and safely, or helping people to foster interpersonal skills that they might have not developed as much with growing up in the internet age. But I think the university has to both create the environment, but also help students to know how to have a voice in that environment, and also how to hear other voices that are going to be in the conversation as we become a more diverse and inclusive community.
I think it's so much more helpful to have a platform where both sides can speak and have their voices heard and be open and not so hateful towards each other and being, I don't want to hear your opinions because I don't agree with them. Instead of just coming to the, okay, we're not going to speak with each other, but let's just have the votes speak for themselves. It's so much more helpful to have that platform, and I feel that the university should try to be that space where both people can come and both groups can come to speak.
Well, I think the problem sometimes we end up having violence is because certain groups of people or certain points of view are not given enough space or enough attention, and when somebody is not heard, then they resort to means that are harmful to people. So it's important that we continue this culture of engaging with whatever viewpoints people have and continue the dialogue and the conversation about freedom of speech.
What we need to do is make sure that the university, as a university, doesn't step in and dictate a particular viewpoint, or, but makes it safe for everyone to have their own viewpoint. And so what we need to do as a university is to make one of our central obligations for you, but also to society, is to help you develop the skill of critical thinking.
I think that there needs to be a reorientation towards community versus individual, and I think that that'll get to some of these challenges about how do we allow voices to be in the conversation if you're thinking about this as the collective community and that my voice can provide something to something greater, that ideally the person who's speaking is keeping in mind how their views might affect other students, and ideally the other students in the conversation are thinking, I need to hear them because they're a part of this community. But that part of what U of O can do is kind of pivot towards that orientation to say we're here for this collective goal of learning together. But again, I think if we can orient towards community within the student body, you'll hear those voices come up and you'll be able to see people having discussions across political lines and across polarized lines.
Great point.
This is an ongoing process. The series happen in a time frame, but this is just the beginning of the conversation. This is not going to stop here. The reality is that the university and every one of the schools and colleges and units on campus need to continue facilitating these type of conversations in the classroom and outside the classroom, through events, through demonstrations, through open forum, and also through debates and roundtables like this one. I'm encouraged by what we have accomplished so far, but I know that we still need to accomplish a great deal. We need to be conscious that this is an ongoing process, and we need to allow these conversations to happen more and more.
Well, thank you everybody for coming together today. I feel like we've made some progress, and I feel like we just keep on doing that, and it helps so much to share ideas and share experiences. So thank you for coming.
That was fun.
I know. Thanks everyone. Bye.